time for newts, it's time for newts, it's time for newts. Can you tell I'm excited? Hi everyone, it's Emily and I am coming to you with my August TBR, and the full month is going to be dedicated to the NEWTs Magical Readathon. This is part 2 of the NEWTs Magical Readathon, and it follows, if you're not familiar with the readathon, first of all I'll link the TBR and the wrap-up that I did for that one. But if you're not familiar with it, it follows the exams that students take at Hogwarts to find their magical careers. And so the owls are part 1, and if you read a book for the various classes and the subjects that you can take a test in, if you read a book, you pass that owl and can then proceed to the newts. In the newts, you can have, so I'll leave the announcement video below that's going to describe it in a much more detailed way, but the gist of it is that for each newt that you take, you need to have a certain number of newts and requirements based on what career you want to have. And so if you pass the owl and can proceed to the newts, then there's going to be reading 1 book and following that prompt for that test will give you an acceptable. Reading 2 books for that prompt will give you an exceeds expectations, and reading 3 books for that newt and following the prompts that are laid out will give you an outstanding. So for any one newt that you need for your career, you could have 3 different books that are associated with that if you want to go all out. I chose the career that follows a ministry worker, and I want to, you can specialize as a ministry worker, you can specialize in different areas of government or areas of ministry. And so I chose to do a ministry worker that focuses on environmental issues, because that's my actual career. So I'm following the prompts for ministry worker and following the specialization for, I think it's care and regulation of magical creatures or something, or protection and regulation of magical creatures, whichever one that is. I'm following those prompts. I struggled for one reason to kind of pick a TBR and pick kind of the path that I wanted to go down, and that's for one main reason. So I can only read a set number of books in a month. For the ministry worker with this specialization, you need 4 newts, so depending on how extra I want it to be, that could be 4 books, that could be 8 books, that could be 12 books, or any range in between there if I wanted to get different grades on different newts. Plus, there are the books to specialize. And so I had to struggle between getting through the newts and having enough space in my TBR to specialize, or deciding to just go all out on the newts and get a higher grade on them but not specialize. I hate doing anything to a level that is considered acceptable. It's not something I've ever been good at doing. I'm always just a little bit extra with my goals, even though it's just designed to be 100% fun. I still am like, but can I get an acceptable in my newts and be okay with myself? So I struggled between trying to find a balance between doing as well as I could on my newts, but also leaving enough space to specialize. Ultimately, I decided to try to specialize and not try to just go all out on the 4 newts that I need for ministry worker. We'll see how that goes. So with that introduction and explanation out of the way, I'm going to get a little bit more into the newts that I need to take and the ones that I've selected for them. So the first newt that I need is charms, and the acceptable prompt for charms is to read a book with a gorgeous cover. So for this one, what I wanted to do is, it's actually a series that I've read, but there's a novella in this series that I haven't read, and the cover is very reminiscent of the other covers in this series and in this world. And I really do love these covers. I think they're gorgeous, and so I think reading this novella will be a way to kind of pay homage to those beautiful covers, but also keep it short and reasonable for a TBR where I'm trying to get through a million books. And that is Cruel Crown by Victoria Aveyard. I read the Red Queen series earlier this year, and I enjoyed it. It gets a lot of hate on BookTube, it seems. I wasn't around for the hype on BookTube when this series actually came out. It's nothing super unique. It's a fun, slightly tropey but still entertaining, fast-paced YA fantasy world. I read all of the books during the government shutdown earlier this year, and so I wanted to read the novella. For this, I think it's a couple of short stories that are combined actually into one small book. Also, I might read this later on, so aside from the Magical Readathon, there's also the Femme Fatale, is that it? Femme Fatale Readathon, which is a readathon that Jean Bookish Thoughts, I believe, hosts, and it's later on in July and is designed to encourage people to read fantasy written by women. And so this would also be a great thing to read during that week in order to also kind of fulfill some of those prompts. The Exceeds Expectation prompt for Charms is to read a graphic novel. For this one, I have some that were given to me by my brother. I have 3 in this same set. I've got Grumpy Cat, or The Adventures of Grumpy Cat and Pokey. And so I've got a few of these that my brother gave me for my birthday. This just follows Grumpy Cat and his friend Pokey as they go on adventures, and it's delightful. I'm not going to do any of the prompts for the outstanding because I just don't think it's reasonable, and there's going to be enough on my TBR even without trying to do outstanding in any of the NEWTs that I'm taking. So we're just going to jump to the next one that I need, which is Defense Against the Dark Arts, and the acceptable prompt for this one is to read a book with a black cover under the dust jacket. For this one, I'm going to actually read a nonfiction book, and that is The Gendered Atom by Theodore Roszak. And this book, first of all, black under the dust jacket. So there's a little bit of red too, but it's mostly black on a dust jacket. So this one focuses on the idea that science is this unbiased entity that can find out through the process of, getting a question, doing an experiment on it, revising the experiment, and getting results that mean something. Through this process, that is an unbiased process that can lead to information, objective information about the world. This book kind of questions whether or not that is an unbiased process, or whether gender dynamics and sexism can play a role in that, not only in the kinds of questions that we ask in science, or what kinds of questions we use science to answer, but also how we interpret the results of those experiments, and whether or not those results are also kind of filtered through different ideas that we have about gender in order to have the results potentially mean something that's not this objective, idealized thing of what science is thought to be able to be. And I really, really, really want to do it just because it's been on my list for so long. It is something that really interests me. I'm very interested in the intersection of science and gender, and so I really think this would be a perfect time to just pick it up. It's short. So again, I think this would be a great thing for a readathon. For Exceeds Expectations for Defense Against the Dark Arts, I really thought this was a cool idea for a prompt, but G from Bookish Roast, and again, I'll link the her announcement video below. She has you kind of pause the video while thinking about just the first book on your TBR that comes to mind, and to have that be your book for the Exceeds Expectation prompt for Defense Against the Dark Arts. And the first thing that came to mind is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This follows a group of people on a ship called the Wayfarer, and they are constructing wormholes across different parts of the universe. It's a character dive into the people on this ship and their relationships and why they're there and how they relate to each other. And I've just heard such wonderful things about this that it has been close to mind, apparently, on my TBR for a couple of months since I got it, and this is a perfect opportunity to read it. This is the Exceeds Expectations prompt, as I said, and so hopefully if I can get through, I only need an acceptable on all 4 of the main NEWTs that I need, and so hopefully I can get to this. The next NEWT that I need is Potions. The acceptable prompt for this is to read a book with LGBTQ+ representation. And for this, I'm going to actually pick up a graphic novel, and that is Paper Girls. This I actually first heard about, I think, on Jean Bookish Thoughts channel, and she read this maybe 2 or 3 months ago or something, and I happened to find it at a used book sale at some point recently, and it follows Paper Girls in the 80s, and things happen. I'm not exactly sure what the rest of the plot is, but Jean Bookish Thoughts really loved it. I would like to read more graphic novels, so I thought this would be a great place to start. And in that video, she does say that this has some, I believe it's a female-female romance or some sort of relationship. There's queer representation in here of some sort, and again, it's a graphic novel, so I think it'll be pretty quick to get through. The Exceeds Expectations prompt for Potions is to read a book with your house color on the cover. And so people who know me in real life can very much attest to the fact that I am very much a Ravenclaw. So the book that I've chosen is Exit West by Mohsin Hamid. This follows two young people, I believe, who are in a romantic relationship, and they're escaping a war-torn area where they live, and they go through magical doors. So it's kind of, you know, magical realist elements, but a story about immigrants and war-torn areas and kind of finding who you are and leaning on the relationships that you have in your life. So this is the one that I thought would be perfect, because not only is it very blue, but it's also relatively short, and so I think it'll, again, be relatively quick to get through, hopefully. Oh, also, I just realized I made a mistake. The LGBTQ plus prompt is the first for transfiguration. I'm sorry. So, I also need transfiguration, and the acceptable prompt for that is to read an LGBTQA plus rep book or graphic novel. Reading this one, as I mentioned. The actual acceptable prompt for potions is to read a book that is your friend's favorite book. Apologies. So, for that one, I'm going to read Circe by Madeline Miller for a couple of reasons. One, I have seen so many booktubers put this very high on their list of favorite books, and it's also the book club, or the book for a feminist book club that I go to every month, and so I needed to fit this in somewhere, and I figured this would be a good place to put this. So this is the actual acceptable prompt, or the acceptable potions prompt book. This is the actual one I'm using for this. Transfiguration for acceptable, I'm doing Paper Girls. The exceeds expectations prompt for transfiguration is to read a book that is not a first in a series. And so I've mentioned this series recently a lot on my channel. I'm currently reading some of the previous books in this series, so hopefully by the time August rolls around, I will be able to get to Blood Witch by Susan Dennard. I'm thoroughly enjoying this series. I'm about to start Wind Witch, and so hopefully I will be able to get to Blood Witch in the month of August. So those are the books that I need to get, in general, the NEWTs that are required for a ministry worker. Now, for the specialization, I've got a set of books for 3 of these prompts. One of them I know, there are 4. One of them I know what I'm going to read. The other 3, I'm struggling, and so it's going to be a matter of just what I'm in the mood for. I have an idea of, I certainly have a lot of options. I have an idea of what I think I'm going to pick up, and so it'll just be TBD on what I actually include or want to read. Care of Magical Creatures is definitely a NEWT that I need to work on. In fact, I need an outstanding in Care of Magical Creatures. I need to read 3 books, each of the 3 prompts for Care of Magical Creatures, and the first prompt is to read a book that starts with A. Oh, and this is for Aragog. So I have quite a few that start with A. One is A Study in Charlotte, and this is what I think I might go with. I'm really excited about this. It's on Scribd, so that'll help me get through it as well, or kind of get through a bunch of books. It follows the descendants of Sherlock Holmes and John Watson, except the descendant of Sherlock Holmes is a woman named Charlotte, and then she has her friend who's the descendant of Watson, and they solve mystery. There's also Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and this one is a beautiful edition I actually picked up when I was traveling in Africa for work. I mentioned this book, this next book, recently in my video of books that I really want to get to by the end of the year, and that is A Reaper at the Gates by Sabaa Tahir, so I'll also be sure to link that video below to get more of a description on this one, but this is another option for that prompt. I also have Ash Princess by Laura Sebastian. This is another fantasy. It's a dark fantasy about a princess. Her people are oppressed and she gets harmed. She's in custody essentially, or she's imprisoned, and she gets harmed every time one of her people kind of acts out or tries to rebel. They punish that people's princess. And for a couple of non-fiction picks, I have A Vindication of the Rights of Women. So this is one I've been meaning to get to for a long time. I collect classic feminist texts. It's also very short, which would be great for a readathon. So this is another option. I also have an environmental memoir by John Lister Kay, and that is At the Water's Edge. To get an exceeds expectations in Care of Magical Creatures, the prompt is to read a book under 300 pages, and I also have plenty of these. So some options include Sons of Commission. This is a Star Trek book by Susan Wright. This was actually published in the 90s. I've been to plenty of used bookshops that have a lot of Star Trek books, and I've just been curious. I'm a huge Trekkie, but I've never read any of the books. I do love Next Gen, and so I just thought it would be fun to try a random Star Trek book. I think this one deals with a murder that happens on the Enterprise, and Worf is framed, I think. There's also a classic, and that is Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. This follows, a group of young boys who find a map to an island where there's supposedly treasure, and an infamous pirate is also trying to find that treasure. I assume chaos ensues. Seems fun. It seems like a fun summer read too. So I also have a couple of Mitch Albom books, and those are also really short and could be good options. So I have The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, as well as The Next Person You Meet in Heaven, The Story of Moana. And this is actually exactly 300 pages, so technically it's not under 300, and I'd be stretching that literally by a page, but that's fine. But I mean, this is just such a fun story. I love the movie so much, and it takes place, on an island and at sea, which is just a great one to read during the summer, it seems like. So I think I might go with this one. The other one I think I might go for is Pride by E.B. Savoy. This is a Pride and Prejudice retelling that follows some Afro-Latinx characters based in Brooklyn. The final prompt for Care of Magical Creatures is to read a book with a bird on the cover. I think is less likely, because it's actually a pretty long book and it's going to be gut-wrenching, is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This is a historical fiction that centers around World War II, I believe, and here's the bird on the cover. And it follows 2 sisters during that time, and I've heard it is absolutely gut-wrenching, and it's, a longer full-size novel. It's not, a tome or anything, but it is a bit longer than some of the other books I have on this TBR, and I'm not sure I'm ready for this emotional devastation yet. Will I ever be? I'm not quite sure, but I don't know if I want to include this, but it is one that I have as an option with a bird on the cover. I also have The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, and it's really hard to tell with this cover, but right along here, so there's a mountain in the background and there are birds flying. In fact, actually, I think it's a little bit easier to tell with this picture, maybe. You can kind of see some birds right there. So that's the same thing that's on the cover in the background, and I've been meaning to get to this for a while. So this is a nonfiction book. It's about creativity, and this is where the idea for Morning Pages came from, and I've heard it's so much more than about just creativity in general, that it's something that really helps people who are in creative pursuits, but also just something to kind of give a different perspective on a lot of just life things in general. And it just sounds really interesting, and I've been wanting to get to this, and it's not very long, so I just think it would be a nice break if I want to break from some of the fiction with something else. This could be an interesting way to go. The last option I have is one that I've been meaning to reread. I've been meaning to reread this whole series, and I do reread every couple of years, and that is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. The illustrated edition has birds on it, and I have been meaning to go back and reread it with the illustrated editions that are out and kind of do that leading up until the 4th illustrated edition comes out later this year. So I might do that. And the final book that I need in order to specialize is to get an acceptable in History of Magic, and the prompt for acceptable for that is just to read a fantasy book, and I don't have it yet. It's coming in the Fairy Loot Wicked Fox by Kat Cho. So this is a story about a 9-tailed fox, or a gamiko, I think is what they're called, and they feed on the life force of men. I don't have the dust jacket to actually get a better synopsis of it. That's another one that I'll be reading, I think, during the end of the end of August, when the Femme Fatale Readathon is, because it is a fantasy written by a woman. But that's it for my August TBR. I'm, as you can tell, incredibly excited to do the NEWTs this year and complete my training to be a ministry worker and help save magical animals. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a very weird TBR, but I'm here for it. And yeah, be sure to subscribe below. I talk about books. I also talk about climate change and sustainability and environmental issues. And so be sure to subscribe below. I'll link my Instagram and Twitter. That's where I like to hang out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.